Americans have a profound misunderstanding of radicalism. They believe a radical is a person who could not get whatever he wanted legitimately, so he became a radical, and if you give him humanitarian help, it will change. I've already said in more than one case that Americans believe that in every Saddam Hussein, there is a little Thomas Jefferson waiting to come out, and all he needs is some help because he had a difficult childhood. Okay, so let's help him and give him humanitarian help. You have barbarians in Gaza, give them humanitarian help. Help Hamas in Gaza. This is what the Americans did. The only thing where we capitulated to the Americans was to their obsession with giving Gaza more humanitarian help that Gaza can even contain. And you give it to them, and Hamas, of course, takes over, and this strengthens Hamas, and stop the war when Hamas wants it, and so on. So again, they have the best of wishes, but the worst of advice. Now, you can have other kinds of Americans, preferably born outside the United States, Henry Kissinger, or an American that Americans don't like, Richard Nixon, because the question is not, is a person lovable like Obama or unpalatable like Nixon? Nixon was a great American president in foreign policy, and Obama was the worst president that the Americans had in foreign policy, again, because he strengthened the enemies of the United States and undermined the allies of the United States. And now in the Arab world, it's not just that they're willing to acquiesce with our existence, they need us. And I can't imagine something better for Israel. You see, Israel used to be, until this war, a regional power in the sense that we had the military capability, the economic strengths, and the technological superiority. But we were not a full-scale regional power, because we didn't have the political ability to maneuver in the Middle East between the different forces in the Middle East. We have it now. So we are now in the Middle East in a far better position, and the chances of a regional war erupting in the Middle East are now far lower than ever before. So in the regional sense, we've already won the war. Now, we still have to maintain it. And this is what we're doing, maintenance. Namely, we spoke about it last time. Don't accept don't contain minor threats, waiting for the day where you don't have a choice and they attack you. When the threats develop, be preventive, okay? Take preventive action. This is what we are doing in spite of the ceasefire in Lebanon. This is what we are doing today in the West Bank with terrorism rising in the West Bank. This is what we will inevitably do in Gaza when the barbarians come back, and they will come back to Gaza. And the idea that you can somehow educate them or change them from the outside, it's impossible. If they want to change, they can change their culture, but they don't want to change, okay? Because you have enormous support in the Palestinian people for what the Palestinians did on the 7th of October. They don't like the consequences of it, but they would have loved to see it succeed. And their heroes are still, their role models are still people who kill Jews. So we still have to have a lot of maintenance to what we've achieved. And if we go back to the previous containment policy, all of this will be lost. But if we maintain this, we are regionally in a very, very, very good place. So internationally, yeah, we are also in a good place. Most of it is not of our doing, but we benefit from it. What already happened in Europe, and to some extent is happening in the United States, is that the progressives lose ground. And the progressives are my enemies, not because they're bad people, but because they're dumb people, because they don't understand that too much of a good thing can be a calamity, okay? We all cannot live without oxygen, but you can die from too much oxygen, okay? We all want a good thing like people loving children but we don't want pedophiles, okay? The question is, this idea that if there is something good, then there is no limit to how much of it you want to be, is an attitude to life that is not grown up. I mean, these people didn't have their bar mitzvah yet. I mean, they're adolescents in not only the students are adolescents in American universities, also the faculty are a bunch of adolescents who couldn't make it outside the university. Not everybody. I know some of them who are fine scholars, and I'm very impressed by what they do, even in the social sciences. But you have this attitude that is now being defeated. First of all, it was defeated in Europe because of the calamity that Angela Merkel brought on Europe in 2015, bringing in millions of people into Europe that practically undermined the quality of life in Europe to the point where the inevitable negative result happened. The inevitable response was people going to the right, and unfortunately to the radical right as well, because the progressives and the fascists are twin brothers. They serve each other, because when you run away from fascism and you're stupid, you go to progressivism, and when you run away from progressivism and you're stupid, you run to the extreme right. So we are still having people growing up, but at least the total control that progressives had over liberals. My problem was not with the progressives. They were not in power, perhaps with the exception of Obama. But they influenced the good guys, the liberals. And the liberals thought that if they want to be good liberals, they must listen to the progressives. If you want to be a good liberal, don't listen to the progressives, okay? Be a liberal. But, you know, nobody will guess from your viewers who said the following, in my view, the smartest thing ever said about politics. Here it is. Power corrupts. Weakness corrupts absolutely. In other words, standing Lord Acton on his head.
Yeah.
The person who said it was Adlai Stevenson.
Wow.
Okay? The arch liberal, my kind of liberal. Okay? The kind of person who understands we must tie one hand behind our back, but not the second hand. Mm-hmm. And now, in Europe, these progressives have lost, and some good liberals lost with them. And I'm sorry, but the good liberals listened to the progressives, which is why they lost. Yeah. Okay? And now, in Europe, this enemy of Western civilization and enemy of Israel, because Israel is a combination of nationalism and liberalism. We call it Jewish democratic, okay? But that's what it is, national and liberal. And if you want this combination to succeed, then you must be delighted with what is happening in Europe, not in terms of the extent, because it went too much to the right, but I think the process will bring it back to the center. And in the center, everything good comes from the center of the political stage. Very often when people ask me, how do you define themselves? I say, I belong to the extreme center. I'm a radical centrist, okay, in this regard. And in America, when the hearings in Congress exposed what was happening in Harvard and in other Ivy League universities, let me put it this way. Sending your child to Gaza is dangerous, but sending your child to Harvard is in a way more dangerous, because you will get him back analytically retarded and morally twisted. So if you realize that weakening this element and strengthening liberalism by weakening progressivism, because people will trust the liberals to say, we will be open and flexible when we can and tough when we must. This is the combination that people will trust, and people will vote for such governments and for such politicians. So we won, or we're winning, on the global level in Western civilization. Again, much of it is not of our doing, okay? Like the question of immigration in Europe and in the United States. But the 7th of October strengthened it, because when you realize this Queers for Palestine, or weather activists for climate activists for Hamas, or this sick distortion, okay? People realized, hey, we must get our bearings again, something. Now, this is the regional, the international, global, and domestic. I have my hope. I'm not sure, but the ugliness and the distortion of some of what is happening inside Israel is being exposed now in a way that I hope for a better political outcome. We have in this government two elements that are disgusting: the fascists and the ultra-Orthodox parasites. And now both of them were exposed. And the electorate of the Likud doesn't want anymore to be associated, at least part of the electorate doesn't want to be associated with either the fascists or the ultra-Orthodox parasites who don't work, don't serve in the army, drain us out economically, and if, God forbid, their proportion in the population grows, Israel will be a Jewish Yemen, okay? A primitive, backwards, repulsive state. So what we are having in Israel now, I hope, I think so, but I'm not sure, I hope, is gravitation again to the center. Actually, in spite of what the leaders of the different parties in Israel want us to believe, in Israel you have very little difference between what is called the left and the right. Between the remnants of the left, in Israel, the progressives committed electoral suicide. We don't have them anymore in Israel. They're not in the Israeli political system. And the good part of the left and the good part of the right, which is the majority, the overwhelming majority of the Israeli political system, don't really have many differences between them. In socioeconomic terms, practically nothing. In question of who are our enemies, who are our friends, and so on, very, very little difference. And on judicial issues, there is a compromise that the president suggested that is something that more or less will be accepted inevitably. So I hope that also in Israel, we can be strengthened. And already one thing was demonstrated that is extremely positive, namely that the resilience of the Israeli people, in spite of the fact that this war is the worst kind of war that Israelis can expect, namely 7 different fronts, in confrontation with Western public opinion, to a very large extent, very long war, and a war that affects civilians to the point that you have to evacuate parts of the country. And in spite of it, there is unbelievable resilience after 30,000 missiles that we've suffered in our main cities and throughout the country in Israel. In spite of the casualties, in spite of the terrible outcome of the 7th of October, the pressure on the government is don't stop the war. Not stop the war, we've had enough, we can't take it anymore. But people in the north say, you haven't done enough. The border is not secure enough. Why did you accept the ceasefire? So you have in Israel a very, very wide consensus of people saying, yes, we've sustained a lot. We have taken a lot of punishment, but since we want things to be better, we are willing to fight.
Is it the same in the South? And do people have the same idea with Hamas?
Yes, I think that the understanding there is a debate in Israel whether you can get all the hostages and then destroy Hamas, or you must behave differently and play more toughly vis-a-vis the hostage so that you can destroy Hamas. But the fact that we must destroy Hamas, that they will not change, that it is not, you come to the Palestinians and you say, why don't we all live together happily ever after? What you have is the kind of people who will continue to try to kill you because it's the only thing they have in their life. They have never seriously tried to improve the future of their own children, not for the last 100 years since there is a Palestinian people. And in Israel, there are very, very, very few people who believe that this can be done in the foreseeable future. You have a little cult around the newspaper Haaretz, and it's okay, why not? But this is really insignificant politically. I say again, they committed electoral suicide.
So we're basically one day post ceasefire today.
Post what?
Post ceasefire, like the first part of the ceasefire ended yesterday.
Yes, but again, don't try to have a discussion about what will happen yesterday and today. Look at the broad issue. You can have these considerations and other, but look at the overall picture. The overall picture is that in spite of not having a functioning government, we have unbelievable resilience of the society.
Yes.
The Israeli society is the eighth wonder of the world. Okay? I don't think imagine the Brits sustaining the Blitz without Churchill, okay? Or any other nation living in a long period of war, maintaining a very deep solidarity. The Israeli army people are coming to reserve service in spite of the fact that we have a very small reserve force, and these people are overloaded, and their businesses and their families suffer, and yet people come and they do it willingly, and there is no negative response in the ranks of the army. There is only very strong motivation and so on, again, in spite of the fact that this government is functioning very, very badly, okay? A large part of Likud voters don't trust the prime minister. And in spite of it, you have such a strong society. So in a way, we have already won also domestically, and I think that politically we are going to win, because we have in Israel about 80 members of Knesset who are not the parasites of the ultra-Orthodox parties, are not the fascists of the Ben-Gvirs, are not the messianics of the Smotrich, and are not the Arab parties who basically align themselves with our enemies. Okay? So, can you have individual Arabs and ultra-Orthodox in the party, and of course religious Jews in the government, but do the good Zionists in the mainstream of Israel have today at least 80 members of Knesset and can form a government?
How many are in the Knesset?
No, today.
Yes, but how many are the total numbers?
The number of the Knesset is 120.
Okay, so 80 out of 120.
Yes, we have about 80 out of 120 who are Zionists, who don't belong to any of the groups who are not Zionist or anti-Zionist, at least in my interpretation of it, okay? Because some people will say the fascists are the best Zionists because they're more patriotic than others. I disagree very strongly. So when I speak about a Jewish democratic state, when I say that this is a package, liberal and national, with this package, we have 80 out of 120. So I hope it will also reflect itself politically. What is malfunctioning in Israel is politics, not the society. We don't have a torn apart society. You have it in America. I recently suggested to my friends in the American Congress to adopt a two-state solution, a democratic state and a Republican state. Okay, so do we have here a society torn apart? No. Do we have a political scene torn apart? Yes, but this is only politics. With all due respect, when you fight for your life, which we are united in spite of this political rift in Israel. Yeah. So you see, I even have a difficulty in finding the word for something that doesn't exist on the level of the society. Yeah. Again, it exists in politics, but it doesn't exist in the society. So basically, we are dramatically better than before the war, and dramatically better than ever before. Now, is it tough? Yes. Can we take tough? Yes, we can take it. Compared to the challenges that Israel had in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, any time before, our challenges now are somewhat higher, but our ability is dramatically higher to effectively respond to it. Israel is a very robust democracy, a very strong state, and Israel is not being pushed around even by the Americans, whom we need very, very much. Well, and we were also lucky with the United States starting the war with the Democrats and ending it with the Republicans. Because had we started it with the Republicans, the Democrats, under the influence of the progressives, would have delegitimized the war here, or at least a large part of them would. And now the Democrats, at least this generation of Democrats, the Bidens and the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers and so on, were on our side, okay? And then when we need to conclude the war, it is very helpful to have Trump, because the Arabs are afraid of him, because the radical Arabs are afraid of him, and the Arabs who are actually our partners, which is the majority of the Arab world, are delighted with him. So it was very good, it was very lucky that we started the war with the Democrats and we ended it with the Republicans. And I hope we will come back to the bipartisan reality in the United States. Unfortunately, I've seen the Gallup poll results only recently. Today, only 33% of Democrats support Israel. Wow. And look at this, 45% of them support the Palestinians and 61% of them support Egypt. So that the Democrats who claim to speak for democracy and human rights and so on support the military dictatorship in Egypt twice as much as they support Israel. So there is something problematic with the Democrats, particularly with young, educated Democrats, if you go deeper into the polls. On the other hand, on the Republican side, 83% support Israel. So 33 on the Democratic side, 83 on the Republican side. I would have preferred to have 60% Republicans and 60% Democrats. I would have preferred to have bipartisan. And I think that if the Democratic Party wants to come back to power, it will have to steer away from this attitude and adopt a more centrist, liberal, rather than progressive attitude. And again, my problem is not with the progressive, they're my enemies. My problem is with the liberals listening to the progressives, and that is a very major problem. But again, to come back to the overall picture, if our situation is dramatically better, regionally, internationally, and probably also domestically, what more can I want?
Well, you just said something about Israel not being pushed around by the United States. What about this most recent UN vote against Ukraine? What do you make of that?
Look, the UN doesn't matter anyhow. So if I have to ask myself, do I want to have the goodwill of Trump, or do I want to have the right vote in the United Nations? It's not a question. Am I on the Ukrainian side? Yes. Do I believe that when it comes to Trump, this is a deeply misguided policy concerning the Ukraine? Yes. Do I hope that it will somehow be compensated? For instance, now that he's being accused of being a puppet of Putin, perhaps he would want to prove that he is not. So maybe he will take a tougher stand. A lot of what he shook up in America, I like being shaken up. When it comes to Ukraine, this policy is a major mistake. I hope that the final product will be not as bad as what it looks today. But in the UN, I would vote with Attila the Hun. A, it doesn't matter anyhow. B, everybody of the so-called good guys voted against Israel all the time, including Obama by abstaining from vetoing the anti-Israeli resolution when he was, between November and January. So if this is the price I have to pay, I would. By the way, if I were Zelensky, I would behave in a different way yesterday, although I'm on his side.
Yeah.
But the question is, sometimes you have to be smart.
Yeah, yeah.